this segment, we're going to focus on the concept of tribalism. And we've decided to focus on that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, to discuss whether this concept of tribalism, firstly, to define it, and then secondly, to discuss how relevant it is, especially in our country, and from our point of view, how we think this concept should be approached. And especially, as our name implies, Boer Republic, is that we are, in a sense, trying to move back to more tribal roots, although this has been seen as sort of the derelict concept, something that has gone on the wayside, especially with today's sort of postmodern government, individualistic world that we live in. The concept of tribe is seen very backwards, in a sense. So first, we'll start a bit with the definition. For me, when I talk about this as a definition, I'd like to go back to its biological roots and to first say that I think one of the greatest harms that's ever been done to the human psyche, I think especially in the last, say, 200 to 300 years, is this concept that we've had of countries where we've drawn basically artificial borders. We've put people of many different phenotypes, races, and obviously tribes. We've just put them in one box and we've forced them into a new tribe, which is very unnatural. And the reason why that's caused so much suffering is because from a biological level, we as humans have psychological needs. And through the last few thousands of years of human evolution, our physiological and psychological needs have developed within these sort of microcosms of tribes that are generally never bigger than a few hundred people at most. And what has happened in the last few hundred years is we have been forced out of that situation. But obviously our physiology has not changed, and hence our psychology has not changed. And again, there is an argument that you could say our psychology has adapted, but my argument in this case is that it hasn't changed. And with that comes the fact that we still need a tribe as the human species. And my argument today is that these artificial borders drawn by governments and countries all over the world does not sufficiently provide the human psychological needs that we have, and we can discuss the needs a bit later. So for my definition, a tribe is a group of people which sufficiently supplies these psychological needs for any human, whether it be 100 people, 50 people, whether it be people of a certain creed, certain religion, certain race. And what we'll talk about now is what we think, how does this definition apply to what we see today in South Africa, and how it has been either used to control people or how it has been used to separate people. So what do you think of my definition?
Well, first of all, I think one of the key aspects to keep in mind when one discusses tribalism or when one looks towards tribalism to try and understand it is one of the factors that go hand in hand with tribalism is homogeneity. You have populations that are largely homogeneous, and that usually tends to create cohesion, social cohesion. In traditional European groups, you would have high trust societies. And in certain respects, I think that definition fits well because you've got people coming together with like-minded interests or like-minded perceptions regarding things. By definition, being tribal is sticking together for the purpose of creating an in-group around a certain factor and excluding an out-group because they do not have that factor. And in many cases, whether or not you're an homogeneous society or a multiracial society, tribalism still occurs.
Yeah, no, it has been shown, many studies has shown, and if you generally leave people alone, they do still follow and congregate along those lines, and they do still form smaller tribes, and you can even see it with the amount of Facebook people you can stay in contact with, that people still go back to that sort of magic number of 100 to 150. It's the only type of people that you can all still really form what you can call a trust group, as you say. More than that, you can't really be expected to form a coherent group, as you say. And I think if we look at our situation, and this is why I brought this topic up, because I think it's really important when people think of the Rainbow Nation, they think of why has this experiment failed, in that we all want to blame either apartheid, we want to blame today's government, you want to blame the Guptas, or you want to blame every other Springbok coach. But in the end, the Rainbow Nation has failed because it has gone against biology. It has tried to create these diverse conglomerates of such different tribes, and it has all been forced against us. And it's virtually impossible for me to ask someone of a completely different group who doesn't know anything about my culture to really, really take my needs into account and look after that. I don't think it is realistic to ask for that person to think of my psychological needs. And I think we can now just get a bit into what those needs are. But I first want to know your thoughts about the state of tribalism is in South Africa.
Well, the state of tribalism in South Africa is, like you said, you've got this phenomena where people tend to stick together of, that in-group and out-group concept. So in South Africa, this is especially the case, and I've heard this argument on the internet many a time, is that you wear your tribe by virtue of the skin that you have. Your ethnicity or your phenotype is something that you present. And if there's a situation where you are in danger, if you are being attacked, and in South Africa this happens a lot, you'll have a disagreement between a white and a black guy, and it immediately becomes a race issue. It could be a misunderstanding at a gas station, and that would be a huge issue, and it would trend across social media, and it would show that this white guy and this black guy fight, and it immediately becomes a tribal issue. So by your ethnicity and by what you have as your skin, that immediately puts you in a tribe. And in this case, in South Africa, you will find that people will generally stick to the people that they associate with better. Generally, that's true across all facets of culture and the way that people behave. I mean, it's a psychological trait that you can't necessarily breed out of people. It's an innate biological function.
Yeah, for me, if you look at it purely out of philosophical point of view, the question comes up, whether you should align according to moral sort of to race and that. And again, this question it's always difficult to answer, because out of a philosophical viewpoint, there's no wrong and right here, whether you should align according to racial lines. But I think why it's important to me and why it's a difficult topic is that we have to admit at some point that it is so biologically, it's so written into us that if we talk as if it shouldn't exist or it doesn't exist, we are being naive and possibly foolish. And this is especially where I find it so damaging, where governments try and align everything to the demographics of the country, meaning everything should be 90% black, 2% Indian, 70% white, and a sprinkle of Asian. It is impossible to do that. You can't change every group like that. It is just, people don't align like that. And I've been thinking generally where, what were the psychological needs that people had in tribes, 300, 400, maybe 1,000 years ago. And what is it that makes us feel safe and secure within such a tribe? If you look at the general trend that we've been seeing in the last 50 years in, Western civilization especially, it is a massive increase in depression, massive increase in anxiety, basic mental dysfunction, which you see everywhere. You could almost say that there has been massive increase, especially where there is an attempt to create this multiracial diversity. And that problem, Big Pharma has obviously jumped in and tried to solve with happy pills, and very unsuccessfully. And I think this is something that society really hasn't started talking about or hasn't addressed. It is the fact that you can't cure any of these psychological ills. You can't cure it with pills. You can't cure it with policies, because in the end, what you need is that psychological needs that a tribe does give. It's that to feel that you are needed within a group, that you are useful within the group, the feeling that you belong, the feeling that there is meaning for your life within this group. So yeah, what we find with governments today is that the way we've set up society, the way we've set up governments and countries, is in complete antagonism to this system of needs, whereby your value is now basically a monetary value of how you can add value through the money that you can bring in, and people basically see you as part of the system, as just another number, and nothing in the system is geared towards these psychological needs of you feeling secure, safe, and with meaning. As we see in any business or company, you are but a number that can be replaced. And with regards to money, if you don't have money, then there's nothing else to fall back on most of the time, if there's not a very strong welfare system or a charity system. And what has happened, especially I think in Western society, is we've really the only focus we have is sort of the microcosm of the family, which is usually 4, maybe 3 people, and then the country as sort of the bigger part of that. And that is, I think, where a lot of damage, psychological damage, has come in, where just that small group of a family of 4 or 3 people, although it feels like it does supply enough of those needs, I don't think it does. I think you do need a bigger group. You need a bigger group which you feel will stand up and fight for you. And in today's age, if you don't have enough money, or if you get in some kind of legal problems, whether that is your fault or not, there usually is no one to stand up for you. The country just sees you as another piece of tax cattle, and a disposable number at that. And I think that has gone very far to create excesses of loneliness and fear within people, which has basically presented as depression and this anxiety that people have. And I think there's obviously a cry out, but people don't know what to cry out for. And I think the answer I want to present is this return to tribal system, where your needs are met within a group which aligns with your values. And if you look at our country, there is so many different values. Just the fact that our national anthem has 3 different languages, and you already see a separation in any crowd when it has to be sung. That is not a sign of unity already. So what do you think of that?
Some of the options that one can consider would then be, does one separate? Would you then have to gather together as a tribe, form your own nationalist folk group with your own folk in mind? So in other words, it would then be an homogeneous society. Is that an option? Because the way I see it, if something is more homogeneous, I mean, we grew up in a society where you could go out. As a kid, you could walk around and nothing would happen to you. Houses weren't prisons back then. The high security complexes and residences and things like that, it wasn't as prevalent back then. The question is then, do you separate into a society or a nationalist ethno-state, or a group or a community where you have your own folk with you, a homogenous group, and then you are ensured that everyone has like-minded goals, everyone has sort of the same outlook on the way you want your society to be? Does that mean that you'd have to move to something like that? What would the options be if not that?
Yeah, again, for me, the first and most important answer is always that you have to dissolve government, as that is, again, all these things that you say is options, but as it is a biological need and a biological imperative within us, if you just allow it, if you allow people the freedom just to aggregate as they wish, these, if you want to call it ethno-states, obviously you can't even use the word state, but these groups will start forming out of their own, and that's exactly what we see that happens if you leave a bunch of people in a school hall, or if you just look at what's the number of interracial marriages, it's basically the most freedom that people have outside of the arranged marriages, probably in some of the castes of India, is who's your partner. Now, if you see what happens, what do most people do? They marry, or they partner up along their racial lines. And hence, the first thing is to try and give people the maximum amount of freedom that they can have. And that only comes when you dissolve the government. I never advocate for any type of control in telling people, you guys have to stay there. You guys have to stay there. The best example is still the Amish, where, as cultic as they sound, they aren't, because at the age of 16, they give you a chance to go out and you can come back, and 80% of people come back. And within the Amish community, obviously an extremely homogenous, non-technological, very peaceful society, which is not government controlled, they have almost zero counts of depression, no suicide, and there's definitely no big pharma. They're trying to control their anxiety, and it's because they live in this state of where your neighbors build your houses, everyone has a stake in each other's lives, everyone needs each other. In a sense, this need for dependence is actually very important within the human psyche. And I'm obviously not saying we have to go back to Amish times, otherwise we won't be having this conversation. But it is, in a sense, that the more freedom you give people, the more people will do this. And again, this is what we're trying through this podcast, is to try and attract the people that have the same values as us, so that we can start this process. Now, do we all have to be in the same area? Do we all have to be in the same district? I don't know. That's up for debate. How can you do this with people over a large area? And again, the ideal would be if people would group together. But again, we know, and we've seen this. And you have examples like Orania, which I would say is successful in this case. The moment you try and do this, and you try and create an area of your own, you start getting visits from your local government municipality asking about extra taxes, and filling in new regulations and laws, making basically what you're doing impossible. So for me, always the first answer is more freedom.
And again, I mean, it brings us back to the idea that the more homogenous your community is, the better the chances of it being a high trust community occurs. You brought up the example of the Amish, and I'm pretty sure that that's a good example of a high trust society, since everyone shares the same ideals. I'm sure you've got a few outliers and things like that in the society that they have, but as a general rule, I'm sure it is fairly high trust. That being said, I mean, we aren't there, we don't have personal experience, but I mean, with something like Orania, they've got many measures in place to ensure that there is a huge trust amongst each other. But that being said, I mean, we aren't insiders in Orania, and again, you can only see from the outside. I think there is something to that, and forming your own communities, your own like-minded communities, is a good start towards a community focused on being tribally aware, maybe even being ethnically aware. I think, well, definitely being ethnically aware, because you want to have your own folk with you, your own people. And I think in that sense, knowing who to trust, and I think trust comes from having people that share the same values. I think at the end of the day, that also breeds better security as a community, simply because you know how the community operates psychologically, and in many other ways how they would be in terms of interaction. These are small things that eventually add up, and when you've got groups that don't behave the same way, then you get clashes. That's something that's been a huge issue for South Africa's history for a long time now.
Yeah, again, the greatest barrier that a government brings to form your own groups is the fact that there is one set of laws or regulations that we all have to abide by. And any time you get smaller groups, like you said, homogenous groups just tend to make their own rules and their own laws and their own regulations, and not having the ability to create, your own laws and morals for yourself, because that's basically what a government does. Once there is laws and regulations, you now don't have control over yourself. Both of us know you have your own rules within your house. You have your own rules within your relationship. It is no one else's right to come and tell you what to do. Let's take, for an example, the Xhosas, or is it the Zulus? I'm not sure. I'm sure I'll be corrected. But that at the age of 18, you send young men into the mountains to have their foreskin circumcised by sometimes a very dirty blade, shall I say.
So it's not a very precise process, let's put it that way.
And again, and I give them the full right to do that as much as they want for as long as they want, to as many people in their tribe as they want. But, if I have a tribe, I'm definitely going to try make a rule that this is not a good idea because it has a morbidity and mortality rate. So what I'm saying is you can't create, for one person or a cabinet or whatever you want to call the mafia that controls the country, for them to now create laws that is able to satisfy the psychological needs of, 11 different tribes is physically impossible. It is biologically impossible. And hence that is the first thing we have to dissolve in order so that you can make your own rules, because that is how trust is built. You build your trust by seeing that the people around you follow the same rules or moral codes. What is that? That, moral codes is just rules anyway. And once you see that, that builds trust. The fact that I know all the other tribes in this country has different ways that they handle conflict, different ways that they handle money. It creates distrust. And again, this is the way that governments control the population. It's because they create distrust. And, when last, I think there is definitely a loss of trust within society. I think it is very unnatural the way we've set up our lives, that we don't really feel trust, because you've been proven wrong so many times.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's no way that you can say, everything is the case where, you deal with people, but you deal with people obviously by being quite aware. I mean, you have to handle people generally with a sense of distrust, or perhaps even being careful how you apply your trust in those dealings with anyone. And that's the case in South Africa. I mean, I see it sometimes where whites help each other and blacks help each other, and then it's then you'd have, for instance, beggars at many of the intersections and things like that, where beggars would get money from whites because they feel sorry, sometimes from blacks depending on the ethnicity of the beggar. So you can definitely see that, and there's no way you can bring everyone together in this country, and that's one way to definitely create distrust within your nation. I mean, it's the standard divide and conquer rule, basically.
Exactly, and it's something that has bothered me for a while. And once you start seeing it, you really start seeing what the real danger in the world is. And again, it's this normal Marxist societies that they try and create, where one of the fundamental principles of it is just ignoring science altogether. And again, you can go and look at all these social scientist studies where what we've been talking about now is the case, that people want their own small tribes where they belong. And, I always felt that I don't want to associate with religious groups because they're also ignoring science. But sometimes I got to ask, which one is the most dangerous? And if you look at the type of science that Marxists and extreme leftists that they ignore, is much more dangerous than the person that still allows me free will and turns the other cheek and believes in fairies. That does not harm me at all. So I think sometimes we have to see the real danger in that. If you don't heed, shall I say, to science, then you are going to be dominated by Marxist and communistic governments in the end.
I think also, I mean, even if you just put science aside, if you look at the world around you, just observe it, not even in an empirical way. If you just look at reality and the way things are in your dealings with people, in the way that the world around you naturally unfolds itself or reveals itself, I think then you immediately know exactly, what reality is like, and many facets of what we've been led to believe in this rainbow experiment is that essentially everyone is equal when everyone is clearly not equal. So, I mean, you can definitely use science to justify your reasoning, and I think it's very valid. But just looking at the way reality is that it's not equal. But the problem is no one is allowed to say it. And when you want to say it, then there's always a huge issue. And even if you say it supporting multiple studies in that still makes you a dirty, rotten racist, And I think the moment you take that stigma away from being able to just speak, just to be able to speak the truth, I think then, real progress can be made.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It is, if we look at what James Damore, the ex-Google engineer who got fired for just speaking basic truths, one of the sad realities of life is speaking basic truths does not manage to convince people. And maybe that's the perfect segue into the topic of the Black Panther, where sometimes we have to use emotions and entertainment to maybe try get an idea across to people. And as I've watched the movie already, and one of the core fundamental principles within the movie is, again, the importance of tribe, a small community segregating themselves from the rest of the world with their own technological advancements. And again, here, as it's obviously very racially divided, I still don't, as the whole Wakanda tribe is black. There's no white people, Asian people in there. But for me, the striking thing is the way that they represent how important it is to fight and keep your tribe secluded, keep your tribe safe, and how their tribe is portrayed as extremely successful, extremely happy, functional. There's no crime. You see no rubbish or pollution on the streets. Everything is functional and everyone is happy. And you could use that and you can say that's exactly what they're saying, because it's true. The smaller, more functional, more homogenous group of people you have, what do you get? You get a very functionally happy society. And have you seen the movie or not?
I actually haven't seen the movie yet, but I mean, I've been reading up on it quite a bit and looking at quite a lot of the reviews and sort of the synopsis of the movie and what people have been writing about it, especially a lot of the reactions regarding the whole thing behind the fictional country of Wakanda. And also, I'm fairly aware of the comic books history and sort of the background to it. And when one of the best reactions to the whole Black Panther situation that I've found is sort of two questions. How many immigrants has Wakanda taken in? And why aren't we allowed as whites to have our own Wakanda? And I think those are two extremely pertinent questions that sort of detail the whole onslaught that whites across the world face when Europe is being flooded with immigrants, when the USA deals with issues where white heritage is being celebrated. And over here in South Africa, you've got the very issue of, the moment we try to have our own institutions, our own communities, we are immediately attacked. We are immediately met with all sorts of fines, with accusations of racism. And when we say, but you're allowed to have your institutions as Sutus, as Xhosas, or however you decide to identify yourself or whatever you are allowed to have that. But when we want it, then we aren't allowed to have it, and we have to include quotas, and we have to include an X amount of this group and an X amount of that group. And at the end of the day, it just proves that the movie, the positive reaction to the movie proves that there is a bit of a double standard in regards to the way that certain realities are presented, especially in the way that Africa is. And there is definitely no super state like Wakanda in Africa, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think just as a warning to the listeners, this will include some spoilers. Yeah, I don't see myself tripping over a spaceship somewhere in the Serengeti quite soon. But for me, I have to admit it is an extremely well done movie, cinematography wise, character building wise, plot wise. I am impressed. But and again, I really want to focus on all the, politically correct rhetoric that was given. I think if you can get a lot of positives out, and one thing that really struck me is, like you say, it really started off suddenly at the start. There was a lot of talk about why they're not taking immigrants, and again, they Wakanda decided not to take any immigrants because they didn't want it to be spoiled, and they described how if they bring just all other Africans in, then it will destroy what it is. So, in a sense, almost blatantly saying what every white man in Europe is not allowed to say. And then at the very end, you have a situation where, obviously, with after a lot of internal conflict within Wakanda itself, where that I think was a very good plot and storyline. In the end, they decide keep themselves pure without immigrants as a ethno state, and they decide to peacefully share their technology with the world, which is, to put it, it's this way of peaceful colonialism. And I think it is trying to say that, yes, it's 100% fine. Fight and protect your own group as much as you can until the death. And if you have to share with other groups, share peacefully. And again, I actually, from all the other things and a lot of bad things people say, this is one of the messages I get out, and everyone's happy with that, which kind of shows, yes, that's exactly how society should work. If people want to be left alone, leave them alone. And if you want to share, again, if you give people all freedom and you allow them to segregate in their very groups, there will always be trade. Otherwise, the world wouldn't exist. There will still be peaceful interactions, and there might be some crossing between cultures, but it will always be minimum. Japan's always going to stay mostly Japanese. China's always going to stay mostly Chinese. And hence, as we've seen so far, Africa is generally going to stay mostly Africa. I don't know much about Europe, but you kind of know the picture that I'm painting. And that is something I want to extract out of the movie. Say that if that is the ideal they're showing, then yes, then you should allow us to create whatever group we want.
And that's the big message to take home, I think, is that many groups are allowed their own nationalist outlook on things, or are allowed their own nationalist preoccupation, or their own nationalist ideal, but we aren't allowed it. That's the big thing. And I think this movie will tend to wake people up a lot more to the positive realities of having an homogenous group or homogenous community. One of the other things that comes to mind regarding the movie, and this is maybe just a bit off topic, but one of the few white guys in the movie, main characters, is a bad guy, and he's got a South African accent. So I mean,
perfect South African accent.
Yeah, that's
perfectly done.
That's the insane part, is and I mean I think where we've sort of white South Africans have developed into, or at least in Hollywood movies, along the same lines that the Russians have. Like the bad guys always have Russian accents or something. And I mean, in this case, it's we deal with the same stigma, and it's actually not the case. I mean, it's either the Germans, or the white Germans, I should say Germans as Germans, but the Germans, the Russians, and the white South Africans as the bad guys. So,
yeah.
That standard is definitely there.
Yeah, you could see Hollywood pushing the standard. You could go back to Lethal Weapon 2. You can go to the bad guy in Elysium, the same guy that played in District 9. And now this is Hollywood is giving the world the view of South Africans being criminals and crazy. And white South Africans being criminal and crazy.
And recently there was a guy who came out. I stand to be corrected. I don't have the source material right in front of me, but essentially what it amounted to was there was a social scientist or an economist or something like that ended up questioning the EU's reasoning behind letting more immigrants into Europe. And what it amounted to was that it would be cheaper to help them in their own countries than it would be to have them flooding Europe and doing nothing. So what it amounted to was, where it would cost countries in Europe, say $50 a day to look after one guy that stays, that lives off, that leeches off the system, the welfare system and things like that. With that same $50, they can help 15 or upwards of 10 people for far cheaper in their own countries per day. So why not stay in your own countries? Why not build up your own countries when it comes to the immigrant question? And I think Black Panther also touches on this issue is, make your own place. Don't go after other groups and take what they've built up. That's also maybe something to consider.
And I think you'll enjoy this. It's a little bit of the conspiracy theorist within me. You'll see in the movie there's a lot of very sort of witty, fast references to colonialism, and there's one very specific way that he references that he's, it was something that he was, some weapon, I think, that he was taking because it's his, and he made the comment that, this was stolen from his people so long ago, so he's just stealing it back, so don't try and take it from me. And you can imagine in the cinema, it was, should you say, it was we were quite outnumbered. And there was a very sort of raucous type of reaction, hand clapping, screaming, type of thing you see at a Anthony Robbins seminar. And it did strike me, right? In the sense that if you think, how long has this message been kind of pumped out there in society of we have to take back what is ours? And again, you and I know the history, and the history is quite clear. A lot of the land was unoccupied. And again, everyone took it from the sun anyway, so I don't know why we haven't made them president. But again, one of the greatest tools that Marxists have is this slow preparation, the slow heating of the water, propaganda through movies, through newspapers, through adverts, through everything. It infiltrates into everything to the point where you sit in a crowd, something gets said like that, and there's hands clapping and cheering. And then, again, I'm saying this with the caveat that I'm a little bit conspiracy minded, but it did strike me that, it feels like, the groundwork is set, it is prepared. People are, in a sense, propagandized to the point that they cheer these things, that if really do we need another society to go down this route where we need to reprimand all our forefathers' sins. It is, if you keep doing this, societies will forever stay in war and you'll forever have bloodshed. So that was quite a telling point for me.
Speaking of bloodshed, I'm actually amazed you were able to get out of the theater alive.
It's ridiculous.
I've seen some insane stuff happening from all over the world, or at least from the US and places like that, where whites weren't even allowed to attend the movie because the moment they try and get
Really?
into the theater, they got they got attacked by youths, and it's like all these things that have come out on Twitter, and so people are there are some serious extreme reactions to the release of this movie, and I think I can't disagree with you. I think that there is definitely, I think that this was intentional. There's no doubt about it. The groundwork was laid long ago, and it's been a slow build up, and this is what we have. We've got essentially, we was Wakanda, we is Wakanda, and it's the reality of the situation. I mean, if you see some of the videos on social media of the reactions outside some of the cinemas, there have been people, and it's all good and well. I mean, as if it inspires you, great, and if it leaves you with a sense of reclaiming something of your own self and your own ancestry and what it can be, although not that it is, but what it can be, I think that's good. But allow us ours as well. We want ours too, and I think some of the reactions have been very entertaining, to say the least.
No, for sure. And again, I always try and tell people that it's not a competition. This grabbing of land and resources does not have to be a competition. But the argument always is that there's finite resources and we are in competition, but in a sense we're not. You can have 15 Wakandas, everyone can be extremely happy on their own and leave each other alone if they want to. There's definitely not finite amount of resources on this world.
Look, South Africa on its own is extremely resource rich. So if you have a few separated states and things like that where people decide, okay, well, this province will be a multicultural province, great, fine, whatever. Or you've got communities that set up and the communities that stay homogenous and they stick to themselves, but that still enables trade where certain resources that you can't get, you do still trade. And I mean, there are ways around it, but at this stage, it sounds like a pipe dream. I'm not sure how real that would be at this stage in South Africa.
No, for sure. And again, a big thing about this podcast is to discuss ideas in a way to get to that state, right? Like I said, it's difficult for me to even say that because philosophically, I never thought I would be thinking so much about tribe and race. But sometimes you have to look at facts and you have to look at what is probably the best way to decrease conflict, to decrease war, is to create as much freedom as you can and allow people the freedom of association. And again, I would love our listeners to put their views and ideas. You can email it to us in the description below, or you can put it in the comment section. I actually did go through some comments regarding people's ideas of how to solve the farm murders. Maybe you can just tell me what you think of this. And someone made the comment that why don't they create sort of kibbutz-like farms where they only employ unemployed white workers or even family members and create a much more self-sufficient type of farm system. Obviously, that'll have great detrimental effects to the economy as a whole, but in the end, people will always want to survive first. But yeah, there's many ideas floating around, and that is one of our purposes, is that people do share their ideas, and we will definitely look through it. And if we find it's a good idea, we will definitely discuss it here.
Well, that does sound appealing in the sense that there are so many people on all the sides of the ethnic question, black and white. There are so many impoverished people in this country. It's insane. And you've got in South Africa, we call them locations or townships, and they are so impoverished, and the government subsidizes a lot of the black townships, but you never hear in the media that there are poor whites, that there are thousands upon thousands of people that live on a tiny space of land. And I've spoken to someone who deals with a lot of these poor white communities or these poor white townships, and they've got nothing. They've got almost no amenities, and if they do have it, it's extremely finite. It can run out. Water can run out any moment. They might not have electricity, if ever, and they sometimes even have to pay rent, and it would be like $1 a day or $1 a month or something, but they'd still have to pay rent. Whereas other townships, black townships, in that they get government subsidies, and they call it the RDB project housing or what.
Yeah.
There are government housing projects for people like that, but not for white squatter camps. And I mean, so there is a huge disparity. I think if you have a system where you support your own ethnic groups, where you support your own folk, I think that's a start to building trust. I think that's a start to building community in this country. And you should create opportunities for your own people first, I think. I mean, as the saying goes, family comes first, and the next step after your family is your ethnic group. So at the end of the day, that's a solution I'm willing to entertain, at least discuss at length.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's all townships are horrific, and I think obviously government doesn't do enough, because again, that's not the answer to any of these. But I agree with you 100%. And it's not that we don't want to help all townships out of poverty. Of course we want to. I always think that natural biological drive, again, goes towards those that your brain has been programmed to see as your tribe. And again, if you try and help them and people don't accept your help or they don't respond well to it, then take your charity somewhere else, 100%. But that is probably one of the first things which we can do. Obviously not we, but I think farmers at large. But I definitely think there is a lot more work to be done, and especially we need as many ideas as we can to help these farmers out.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit more. I'm somewhat more extreme in that regard. As you definitely have to help out your own communities first. And as much as you can, but within reason. Obviously, I mean there are many corrupt black political leaders in this country that can use their own money to look after their own folk. So and that doesn't happen. So I think people need to come together and see how they can help their own communities, their own people. And I think things will go better for the country as a whole once we realize that it's not painful to talk about race, because race is a reality in the sense that there are ethnic considerations to take into account.
Yeah, if I don't know if you've known the Uruguayan president. I don't know if he's still president or if it was years ago, but it was a very popular article at the time, and it went quite viral. It was a Uruguayan, a speak on a correction president, and he basically gave up 90% of his salary. He gave it back to the people. He lived like a minimalist. He drove to work in some kind of
Yeah, it was a really old car. Yeah, a really banged up
super
old
old car. And as much as I'm against any government, I have to respect that guy a little bit and say, you know what, that is the least amount of evil you can do, is at least giving as much money back as you can to the people. Live off whatever you can, because again, and that's what, if I ever meet our new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, my first question, Peter, is, you know what, if you want to prove yourself and if you want to actually make anyone believe in what you say, if you become president of the country, it basically means you believe in government the most, meaning you believe in government programs the most. Hence, let go of your private medical aid, let go of all your retirement annuities, your private retirement annuities, give full trust in our transport system, give full trust in our medical system, and if you take all your money, you could probably lift one whole township out of poverty for 10 years. And I'm not joking. He literally is one of the richest men in South Africa. If you want to be a real president, that is a way to gain one iota of my respect, is if he does that. Will he do that? Of course not.
No.
But that is, if he wants to get a stamp approval from us, that is the first thing he has to do. And, imagine the response he'll get if he does that.
No, I mean, like, if you look at Trump as an example, he let go of the presidential salary. So he takes no money in as a president. He doesn't receive a salary as a president. I think he only receives about $1, and that's for tax reasons. That something has to be declared. But he completely waived his presidential salary away for his entire term.
Yeah.
So,
and that is something you can respect, yeah.
And he doesn't need it because he's a self-made man. So in that sense, that's an example to look at. The earlier example of the South American leader was perfect. I mean, he was a true man of the people. Well, it's still a South American country, and its success only goes so far. But the reality of the situation is that to me is a moral stand as a political leader. On that, I think that is a good note to finish off with. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, so lastly, I would tell our listeners that it probably is okay for you to go watch the Black Panther. I think you should. It is something that is going to come up in conversation, and you always want to have at least some authority to be able to comment on it, but really take note of those small intricacies that we talked about and the plots around what tribe means. And again, we'd love to hear your comments and suggestions, but otherwise, that's all from me.
We want to hear from you. We want to interact with you. We reply to almost any and every comment. So whether it's on Gab or on Twitter, we will definitely get back to you. And the email address on our various social media links, so please contact us. This has been an episode of the Boer Republic podcast. Please follow us and subscribe on all our various social media pages. The various links can be found in the description below. Media content will be uploaded often and social media updated regularly. Thank you for tuning in. It is our hope that this podcast informs and inspires. Stay safe and remain hopeful for your future, wherever you may find yourself.